Welcome to CivilNet. My guest is a very special person, somebody whose work you've seen, may not have met. Սկաուտ Թուֆենքչյանը is a photographer responsible for the presidential election campaign victory book. Is that a fair way to say it? Yes, we can. The picture of President Obama and Mrs. Obama hugging after the election. Սկаուտ Թուֆենքչյանը, welcome to Armenia. Welcome to CivilNet.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're here to work on a TUMO project.
I'm teaching a workshop at TUMO. I'm teaching around 38 kids 3 days a week. I'm teaching a storytelling workshop.
Storytelling through photos.
Exactly.
Do they realize how lucky they are?
I mean, I realize how lucky I am. TUMO is amazing. The kids are so enthusiastic. They're so active. You put a camera in their hands and they're climbing on things and they're upside down and they're checking out different angles.
And you don't tell them that's not how they're supposed to do it?
No, it's totally how you're supposed to do it. It's, you know, a straight image is great, but if you can, you know, playing around with it is how kind of the magic is made.
When did you understand that?
I've always kind of, I don't know, focusing on one thing, you always try and get a different angle and make it more interesting, see the world in different ways.
You've not only seen the world in different ways, but you have seen all sorts of different parts of the world. I mean, your projects are all over the place.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate. The thing about my job, the reason I love photojournalism is I find people absolutely fascinating. And I've been incredibly lucky in that my job allows me a window into people's lives all over the world. And
a very immediate window. It's really hard to hide from a photojournalist.
It is. I mean, you know, we're not kind of breaking into people's houses or anything like that.
No.
But yeah, no, it's... there's a couple of different ways of going about photojournalism, and there's kind of the fly on the wall, invisible kind of style of working, and I talk too much to do that. So I tend to engage with my subjects and talk with them and try and put them at ease through.
Does President Obama require being put at ease?
No, he is incredibly good in front of the camera. He's very relaxed. He's very aware of the camera and very aware of the lens and kind of people's eyes on him, but he seems perfectly relaxed. So yeah, no, he's great.
You've been in parts of the world that aren't so relaxed. You've worked in Haiti, you've worked in the Middle East, both in the really troubled parts, and you were in Egypt during the revolution?
I was, yeah.
Tell us.
That was probably the most amazing story I've ever covered in terms of a group of people getting together and spontaneously changing their country. You know, the Obama campaign was amazing, especially the first Obama campaign, but the kind of, you know, the planning that goes into it, it's all very organized and very planned and very thought out, whereas the Egyptian revolution was just this amazing 18 days where people got together and decided to change their country.
And those of us who want to bring change to Armenia, not necessarily with revolution, just change, have a really hard time getting our head around that.
It's very hard to get your head around it having been there. I mean, we had no idea what was going to happen. Even a week and a half in, or 2 weeks in, we were, you know, there were secret police in Tahrir Square filming all of the foreigners, and we thought we're never going to be able to leave the country. You know, how are we going to get out of here? It wasn't until really the day before Mubarak stepped down that you thought that, you know, this could actually happen.
Your presence was welcomed or seen as intervention by the masses?
By the revolutionaries, we were very welcomed. The underdog, as a general rule, welcomes photojournalists. It's the, whether it's the status quo or the people with the bigger guns tend to not like us. And there were a few occasions where the revolutionaries didn't want us around. For example, I did a story about, there were these secret police guys who were coming into the square. Some of them were suspected, some of them actually were. Egypt is a country where your occupation is on your ID card. And they were arresting them, you know, kind of doing a citizen's arrest, and they were holding them in a makeshift prison in a travel agency called Suffer Travel. And so they were interrogating these guys under these kind of posters of like, fly to Dubai. And as they were being dragged into the travel agency, people, it was a very tense situation, were beating them. And the revolutionaries were smart enough to realize that this didn't really look that good for them. And so they didn't want that to be photographed and reacted very angrily. But for the most part, they wanted us there. It was the pro-Mubarak, pro-regime forces that didn't want us there. And it's a shame because as a journalist, you want to be able to cover both sides of a situation. And we had absolutely no access to them.
Do you choose to be where you go, or do you get sent?
It works out kind of either way. There's some element of choice involved. I can say no.
Sure.
I usually choose where I'm going. It's usually something I'm interested in.
And you're interested in a whole lot of different things. You've done Anatolia. What brought that on?
I've been working on a long-term project about the Armenian Diaspora, where I'm trying to create a portrait of the diaspora as it exists today. So I'm traveling to different communities. So far I've been to Brazil, Argentina, but only for a couple days, so I need to go back. Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, the United States, Ethiopia, and I felt like something was kind of missing from it, and that was kind of the old
roots.
Country. Yeah, the old country, and most kind of diasporan Armenians grow up hearing stories about the old country that are as much myth as they are reality. You know, they've kind of faded.
Because we have the memories of children, after all.
Absolutely. I mean, my great-grandparents came over as orphan children,
right.
So their memories are very
skewed.
Exactly. And so a friend of mine, another girl who's half Armenian, 25-year-old girl, was going over, and she'd done all this research, and I decided to go with her. And I actually shot most of the project with an iPhone because I thought the kind of colors and the quality of the image would reflect kind of the way that the memories of the old country had changed throughout the generations, and kind of more of a fever dream than a reality.
Did you manage to see Syria when it was still
I did,
Syria?
Yeah. I was there in 2010. I actually bought my wedding ring there.
It's all good jewelry and gold is to be bought in Syria,
exactly.
Yes.
I was in Damascus, Haleb, and Kasab. And it was wonderful. It was probably my favorite place I've ever been.
This isn't your first visit to Armenia.
No, I came with my father in 2002 for 10 days. So it's very different. It was during the Kerkorian project, so a lot of the roads were torn up. But it was wonderful. My father and I had never traveled, just the two of us. So it was great. We ate a lot, mostly.
Good Armenians.
Yep, exactly.
Good Armenians. Your links to the Armenian world are through your father's family. And are they typical diasporan sorts of links? The kebab, the church, the...
Yep, the church less so. We would go occasionally, but the nearest church was an hour and 20 minutes away from my house. I think we're typical American diasporans in that my father's generation was very assimilated, and my generation is getting more involved. My cousins have joined Armenian men's clubs. They're much more involved in the community. They're reaching out. They've given their kids Armenian names.
Why do you think we do that?
I think it was probably growing up in the kind of the 50s and 60s. My father was the only Armenian family in town.
What town?
Whitman, Massachusetts. My grandmother and great-grandmother used to walk around and pick grape leaves out of people's yards, and I think he found this totally humiliating. And so I think that he just had this kind of, I want to be American thing that was natural at that period of time. I mean, as a country, America has gotten a lot more interested in multi-ethnic and multicultural.
I think that generation's hiding is easy to understand. What's fascinating for me is the next generation's curiosity.
Well, when your last name is Tufankjian, every time you meet someone, they ask you what you are. And so I think that has something to do with it as well. And the things that I grew up taking for granted, the food, the holidays, the way my family interacts with each other, you start to realize is actually cultural, not just specific to your very family.
You've worked in Turkey, not just in Anatolia.
Yep. Less so, mostly in Anatolia, but I've spent a lot of time in Istanbul.
And your last name and your job?
The job is more complicated than the last name. Most people, outside of the kind of the intellectual elite and the kind of the left wing, most people genuinely don't know that the genocide happened. I was with a family in Ankara, which is the capital, and they said, oh yeah, there used to be a lot of Armenians around here. Where did you all go? And it was a genuine question. They weren't being mean. And so I think the the younger generation is, you know, they have YouTube, they have access to the internet. It's harder to kind of close them off from history, whereas the older generation grew up without those things, and all they have is kind of what they learned in school. But still, you have young people who say, "Oh, yeah, you know, you're Armenian. We both drink ayran." So I never had any problems with being Armenian there, other than a few kind of snide comments from soldiers in Anatolia, mostly in Diyarbakir. But being a journalist is tricky. But I don't work there that much.
It's interesting. You refer to yourself more as a journalist than as a photographer.
Yeah, well, I'm a photojournalist. So, but journalism is kind of the key aspect, with the exception of working for the Obama campaign, which was a big exception.
There you were a photographer.
I've always done journalism. And in the 07-08 campaign, the one I did my book on, I covered it as a journalist. It was only this most recent campaign in which I worked for the campaign itself.
What's the difference?
There are, you know, the way I shot wasn't different.
The reason I ask is because I'm not sure that we know that difference in Armenia. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I've been asked a lot why I didn't kind of, for example, enter my pictures from this campaign into journalism photography contests and things like that. And to me, it just seems so obvious that it's not journalism. If your paycheck says Obama for America, you know, it's not journalism. I mean, it's advertising. And
good advertising. Good
advertising. But advertising. And, you know, your opinion about that depends on how you feel about the candidate and so on and so forth. The way I shot the campaign wasn't different than the way I shot it as a journalist, but you know, I'm sure the way I was edited was different, and even the appearance of bias makes it not journalism.
Thank you for giving us this time. This was a great conversation.
Thank you very much.
Սկաուտ Թուֆենքչյանը, what a great name, what a great career. We are going to follow you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. It was lovely to meet you.
Thank you. Photojournalist Սկաուտ Թուֆենքչյանը, whose career, her young career still, has taken her from Haiti to Gaza to Egypt to Anatolia to Armenia and to the Obama campaign as well. Thank you for following us on CivilNet.